Hello and welcome to Big Nostalgia. I am Phill.
And I'm Vicky.
And this is a podcast where we take the games from our youth and we look into their development. We look at why they were started to be developed in the first place. Who were the characters in the game? What story was it trying to tell? What were the themes? And importantly, what were the quirks? What's quirky about the game? What was left on the cutting room floor? If you've been listening so far, you know this intro, because we are halfway through Season 3 now. This is the halfway point.
Wow.
And today is a little bit different, because this is the first of 2 games this season, and it's a first for this show, where only one of us played it when we were kids. So this week, Vicky's got the big nostalgia, because she played this game when we were little.
I did.
I've only got the little nostalgia, because I've only played it more recently. The game, of course, you can see it in the video title, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. Zelda game number 2 for this season. Is it as good as Twilight Princess? Is it similar? How is it different? We're about to find out, because Vicky's going to take us away.
Well, dear old Skyward Sword. There's a lot to say about this game. It was the 16th main installment from the Legend of Zelda series. It was the first Legend of Zelda game created specifically with the Wii in mind, and also, of course, requires a Wii Motion Plus, which I'll go into a bit more detail later in this episode. It was developed by Nintendo EAD, Nintendo Entertainment Analysts and Development Division, which I believe a couple of other games have been developed by. Publisher being Nintendo. The director, Hideo Fuji. I absolutely ruined the Japanese. Please excuse me. Fujiya. Producer, Aonuma. Yeah, it had designers, programmers, and artists, and writers, and composers. All with wonderful names. Please see more details in our description below, because I'm not going to ruin too much of the Japanese language today. But let's move past my awful pronunciation and move on to early development. When Aonuma was asked in a 2007 interview if Twilight Princess would be the Wii's only Zelda title, he replied, I can't say, but I guess for now, maybe, yeah, laughs. Not to say that it's going to be the final game. There's still a lot of potential with the Wii, so there's still a possibility that there could be another Zelda game for it. We do have some ideas in the works, but I can't say for sure because none of them have been approved and we're still very much in the planning process. So I hope you look forward to whatever comes out. So he was as vague as anything, really, in the 2007 interview. In a private meeting at E3 2007, he began to give details about the then-to-be-soon released Zelda title, Phantom Hourglass. He then began speaking about Skyward Sword. In his excitement, he revealed more details about the game, but was withheld from divulging too much information by Shigeru Miyamoto.
He just tackles him to the ground, no, shut up!
No, don't do it!
You're getting carried away with yourself.
Guys, picture a table, and he's just chatting away, and Shigeru Miyamoto's next to him, giving him the biggest bruises on his legs, dude, shut up, dude, this is awkward, they're right there, just stop. And him just I love Zelda games, and he's just dude.
Miyamoto's one to talk. We've talked already about how, golf was only in Wii Sports Resort because he said in an interview that it was.
Well, apparently it's one of those do as I say, not as I do sort of moments.
Yeah.
Aonuma did indicate that he'd like to have a whole new control system for the game, and that it would be possible that one-to-one swordplay could be implemented. He also said that he'd like to make the game to appeal both to casual and hardcore gamers, a sentiment echoed by Miyamoto in later interviews. But to be fair, that's all well and good, but I feel like a lot of Zelda games are quite easy to pick up, but maybe I'm just saying that maybe that's the sort of nostalgia we're going to get from this, because personally I find a Zelda game very easy to pick up, but maybe because it's part of a series or because it has such a fan base, maybe it doesn't come across as easy gameplay as a fan would. What are your thoughts?
In every game up to that point, every 3D Zelda game up to this point had pretty much followed the blueprint as set out by Ocarina of Time, with very few variations,
Majora's Mask.
Well, Majora's Mask used the exact same control
I know,
scheme.
but the story was different.
I'm talking about its ability to be picked up and played.
I see.
Like, every Zelda game, like, you walk up to something, then the action, but, like, all the time, one of your buttons was a sword, and always one of your buttons was your action button, which would flip over and say, pick up, put down, read. And then the C buttons, or the directional stick or whatever, or X, Y on the GameCube controller, were your item slots.
Yeah.
Like, that had been fundamentally unchanged in every 3D Zelda. So that meant the more Zeldas you played, like, we found Twilight Princess easy to pick up because fundamentally its controls were only a slightly tweaked version of the ones we've been playing since we were very little. And to be honest, the 2D Zeldas all roughly follow a similar... They all roughly follow a blueprint set out, obviously starting with the original, but then probably set in stone a bit more with A Link to the Past. And even the handheld ones kind of had a formula.
So when it came to development, the handheld ones, let's be honest, if you think of the DS, the 3DS, and the Advanced, regardless of how much technology they had and what they looked like, the basic controls were similar.
And the 3D, same 2D games are all similar in a way, the 3D ones are all similar in a way.
So, but where the controls are on the actual pad, they're all in the same place because that's a Nintendo project. So they were able to easily convert, regardless whether you're playing like Phantom Hourglass to A Link Between Worlds or whichever game you're playing. It's still, as you said, the way you hold the controller is still basically all the same. So it was very easy to translate over. Whereas, of course, this one really was going to take advantage of that Wii Motion element.
Yeah, and you can't, I guess conceptually you can't fault them for saying, like, well, every Zelda game is played the same, let's maybe see what we can do.
So it was actually stated by Shigeru Miyamoto that Twilight Princess is, without a doubt, the last Zelda game as you know it in its present form, which I felt was kind of like a very cheeky way of phrasing it. However, the meaning of this quote leaves quite a bit to be interpreted. In that same vein, Aonuma more recently revealed that he was looking to alter the traditional flow of the Zelda games, which usually consist in exploring the field, entering a dungeon, conquering a dungeon, and returning to the field. I do feel in a way that Skyward Sword does influence quite a few games. We've talked about this before in the Pikmin games, how earlier games have influenced later games, and I do feel Skyward Sword influences Breath of the Wild, but in a different way of other Zelda games.
Yes.
Because it was trying to break out of... It's still quite traditional. There's still temples. You still have to go on quests. You're still following a princess, even if you're not saving a princess. But it was still trying some new elements, like the motion control, regardless how well it was received. And the storyline, it was trying to do... I do feel it was trying to do something new. And I feel that has been represented in the Breath of the Wild.
I feel like some of the mechanical stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into, was new, but story-wise, structurally, it's still very traditional because it's still first 3 temples, big plot point event, final set of temples, final boss.
Yeah.
You can put in as much filler between the temples as you want, but that is exactly the same as Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess.
And Majora's Mask to a degree as well, isn't it? Because even though it had the time element, you still had to do the temples.
But I mean specifically... First 3 temples, big plot revelation, final temples.
Yeah.
Because in Ocarina, it's Deku Tree, Dodongos, Jabu Jabu, you become an adult, you do 5 more temples. Twilight Princess, it's Forest Temple, Goron Mines, Water Temple, big plot point, you do the rest of the temples. This one does mix up in the fact that it doesn't go grass, fire, water, though, which I appreciated.
Grass...
Fire, sand, electric.
Yes, and time.
I really like that. I do like that temple, actually.
We'll go into temples a little bit later, but no, that is a very good point. Miyamoto actually confirmed that Skyward Sword was going to be in development in 2008 E3, and it actually got produced alongside of Spirit Tracks.
Okay,
by a separate team and released before the end of the following year. So those were the 2 games that they're working on side by side. That is a Zelda that I haven't actually played.
Spirit Tracks.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind getting it to give it a go. Is it DS or 3DS?
DS.
I do have a DS.
It's a direct sequel to Phantom Hourglass, but it takes place like hundreds of years later.
I don't particularly like Phantom Hourglass, but maybe that can be another video.
I didn't get along with it either, so I've never beaten Phantom Hourglass.
No, nor have I.
I've got very few gaps in my Zelda play history, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I'd say those two gap, along with Minish Cap. I've never played that.
Yes, I've never played Minish Cap.
Anyway, at the round table at the E3 in 2009 convention, Shigeru Miyamoto disclosed that Skyward Sword would be announced in E3 2010. Artwork shown at the round table was leaked shortly after, depicting a swordless adult right-handed Link, as well as a mysterious female figure bearing the resemblance of both Fairy Queen and Master Sword. Miyamoto admitted that the Skyward Sword version of Link is older than those of the past titles, and placed with an emphasis on Link's lack of sword in the leaked artwork, particularly when questioned about the girl. The actual title of Skyward Sword was not released until E3 2010, before which it was known as only the Zelda Wii. So dear old Miyamoto was just like, yeah, it's going to be announced in E3 2010, but the actual release date of Skyward Sword was November the 18th, 2011, which, considering Miyamoto was being really cocky at the table, is actually pretty late in comparison.
Yeah, and it's quite late in the Wii's life when you consider the Wii U came out in 2012.
Definitely. During the Game Developers Conference in March 2011, a new demo was exhibited, showing several new actions Link can perform during the adventure, not to mention the new locales and environments. Link faces redesigned Skulltula and two Liz foes. He has a go at this puzzle to open a door and comes face to face with Kolostos. The first significant NPC was revealed to be a mysterious white-haired man who can vanish into thin air, similar to the way Midna and Zant teleport in Twilight Princess. And then, of course, wasn't actually released until November that year. There was a lot of hints and E3 conventions, but they kept a lot to their chest. But, as you just mentioned, if you think the Wii's lifespan, it was a very late in the game development for such a high and well-known title. Also, I feel like we need to mention the black sheep in the room. I've touched on it a little bit so far, but not a lot. The Wii Motion Plus. So the Wii Motion Plus was developed for the Nintendo in a collaboration with game developers tool company AI Live. The sensor used is an inverse sensor, or it's got a little code here, IDG/650 in later units, designed in accordance to Nintendo's Pacific designs, with a high dynamic range, high mechanical shock tolerance, and a high temperature and high and humidity resistance, and a small physical size. The Wii Motion Plus was conceived soon after the completion of the initial Wii Remote design to address developers' demand on more capable motion sensing, but was only announced after sensors could be purchased in the sufficient volume at a reasonable price. So it was all delayed due to manufacturing.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if we're going to talk about how Skyward Sword was quite a late game in the Wii's life, we need to mention how late in the game that Wii Motion Plus was actually involved. Because it felt like Wii Motion Plus came out, Skyward Sword came out, and then the Wii U came out.
Yeah.
It was all very well. I do feel that hindered certain aspects of certain games that involved the Wii Motion Plus, just because it wasn't involved.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's when you had that new console in development, it's almost a wonder they didn't hold it off and just make, I don't know, like a Wii U controller, which was the Wii Motion Plus. But
it's a hard one, because if you've put all this time and effort in and you've been waiting and waiting, you can't help when the product becomes available. But yeah, at the same time, I don't think it was planned very well.
And I suppose you got a lot of software that's probably been using development versions of those controllers that were, they're planning a Wii release. And then if you sort of a sudden go, we're going to hold this controller back for the Wii U, then all of a sudden all those games get delayed. And potentially have to be majorly reworked because they're going onto a more powerful system.
Well, during the developers' roundtable discussion in E3 2008, Wii Sports Resorts producer Kazuyu Ijiki discussed the potential influence of the Wii Motion Plus on the Wii's existing market, stating that Nintendo was looking at whatever the Motion Plus capability will be to build into the Wii Remote in the future, or kept as an attachment we only use for certain software. Nintendo ultimately chose the former by releasing the Wii Remote Plus in late 2010. Now, I did look into a bit of the Wii Motion Plus. There was a certain amount of games that supported the Wii Motion Plus. How many games do you think supported the Wii Motion Plus? And how many games out of that collection were only Wii Motion Plus games? Like, they can only be played with Wii Motion Plus.
20 games total.
There was 50 games that supported on the Wii.
Out of those, was it 20?
Out of that, only 7 games on the Wii had to use Wii Motion Plus. Out of the 50.
Damn.
So that is quite a low percentage.
I remember it being a big deal. Yeah, because we obviously didn't... We haven't covered it explicitly, but we talked about, obviously, Wii Play : Motion, which was one of them.
Yep.
Still a daft name. And Wii Sports Resort, which was almost meant to be the launch game for, like, the Wii Motion Plus. Because it came bundled with it.
Yeah.
I know that Skyward Sword came out with the Wii Motion Plus, because I got it... So it's ironic, because I didn't play the Wii version of Skyward Sword. I got it for Vicky for her birthday, and then didn't play it. But I think by this point, though, you would already have been at university, maybe? There was some reason why I never played it.
I might have been at university.
Yeah.
And you think of how many games it included Wii Motion Plus, it still would have been triple that if they had managed to get it out when they wanted it to get out, if they didn't have issues with supply chains, which you can't help. At the end of the day, you can't help, but it has had a big influence, I think, because they didn't even have like a tester run either before they start making games specifically only Wii Motion Plus base.
Yeah, maybe they expected it to move a bit faster and it just ended up going a different way and they weren't able to mitigate.
Well, I do feel the technology was... It was good technology. The idea was there, and obviously they were having problems with the Wii Motion detector, which is why they're making it in the first place. They were trying to get something to support it, but it still wasn't quite right. I don't think they've been able to properly manage that. Do you think they've managed to sort that problem with the Wii U? Because you had a Wii U and I didn't. Or do you think they've only been able to sort that out with the Switch?
I think they, over time, have just stopped being so concerned with it.
Oh, okay.
Because the Wii U went for a tablet, didn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah.
The Wii, and you could use your Wii remotes with your Wii U, but it was either your regular Wii remotes, or it didn't mandate you had the Wii Motion Plus. So again, games for the Wii U could not be designed to have to use a Wii Motion Plus, because there was no guarantee that people would have it. Instead, all of a sudden, all the games had some kind of gimmick for which you required the second screen.
Yeah.
Which was the Wii U's big thing. And then on the Switch, they've put gyro controls in the controllers. So that's why when you play Wii ports, like Skyward Sword HD, or Mario Galaxy's release on the All-Stars 3D, you have to occasionally press the button to recenter the remote.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually... There's no sensor bar for a Switch.
No.
It's measuring you moving the controller up and down, but that's non-precise because it's not tethered to anything.
I was finding that quite a lot playing Mario Galaxy on the Switch.
It's going by which directions you're moving the controller, not relative to a sensor bar that uses infrared like the Wii.
Yeah. It's
the gyro controls inside, something they originally put into the 3DS.
Fair enough.
I'm pretty sure. Somebody in the comments will correct me if I'm wrong and it was developed before then, but I'm pretty sure one of the big things the 3DS bragged about was the gyroscopic controls, which is why for some games on 3DS, you can move the entire console to aim.
Well, this feels like a good place to go into the gameplay. At the E3 2010, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword was revealed during the Nintendo press conference, introduced by Reggie, Phyllis, Ami, and Shigeru Miyamoto.
Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Reggie Fils-Aimé.
That's not even a Japanese name.
I was so confident with their name because I was like, it's not Japanese, his name's Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Yeah.
I need to get better with my names. I do apologise. Please, I hope it's more funny than offensive. Miyamoto discussed that the use of the sword and the shield would be incorporated into the motion capabilities of the Wii Motion Plus and the use of the nunchuck accessory. The sword could also be charged up by holding the Wii remote straight up in the air, and once it was charged up, the remote must be swung downwards to release a beam as a projectile attack. Waha! Since the Wii remote served as a sword, the nunchuck would be the shield. Quickly shaking the nunchuck would cause Link to raise his shield. The nunchuck should be held up in front as if it was a real shield. Miyamoto demonstrated this by blocking attacks from Okaroks and even using the shield to send projectiles back at the enemy. Weapons such as bombs, slingshot, bow, and the return of the sword beams, and the new items such as the beetle and the whip were all showcased, all using the natural aiming and directional applications of the Wii Motion Plus. So I do like the concept. I will go into more details how well I actually played the game initially in my youth, but I like the concept. The concept was there. You want to play a fighting game, you want to pretend that you're holding a sword and a shield, they're literally giving it to you. This controller, that's the sword. This controller, that's the shield. You are literally doing a bit. It feels like a bit of children in the playground imagining they've got swords and shields with like sticks and stuff like that. The concept is down. The problem I have is it feels like the technology was not up to scratch. It could not do what they were hoping.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a very conceptually strong game, and like, just saying about some of the new items, I think were great, and it's a real. Obviously, Breath of the Wild is fantastic, but it's a real shame that there's not been any more games with the Beetle. Like, playing Skyward Sword, one of the fun things to do is to fly the Beetle around and scope out the area. It feels really, like, intuitive, and also there's certain things that the game does bring, such as bowling bombs along the ground, which is a new ability. So it does feel different. Like and what the wind blower is another new item, and you can see that they've really tried to mix it up because it's not the same. Obviously, there's certain items that do return, like, you know, bombs are in every game, bow and arrows in every game, but they've, you know, I was quite interested playing through Skyward Sword because I honestly, for once, did not know the item I was about to get, because again, one of the traditions they were revisiting was the Link's arsenal, and they were seeing how it obviously corresponded to the Wii Motion Plus. But, you know, you could pretty much say with some certainty in the older games what item you're going to get in what dungeon, outside of like the cool niche ones each game had.
You were saying about the different items. You're right. You had the beetles, and then you could upgrade your beetles, couldn't you, to a certain degree?
Yes.
You got your bow, classic. Bombs, classic. Net, classic. You had the claw shot in this. You get those. And, of course, the digger mitts. I thought the digger mitts were pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
Concept. Because that's all in the fire level, isn't it? And being able to, like, dig the ground for bits and pieces has been a very interesting element to add to the game. I do like the items in this game. The sailcloth, of course, makes me think of Breath of the Wild.
Yes.
The different slingshots is quite a traditional item for the old Link to have. You've also got fire shield earrings, which obviously comes up later in the game. The goddess's harp, the whip, and the water dragon scale, which some of these items aren't actually usable items, they're just plot devices as well.
But I think, like the digging hands are really cool. I almost forgot about those, because those are what I guess you'd call a passive item, as you're always wearing them.
So you don't really think about it, do you, after a while? You don't remember getting them. Also,
getting the bow slightly later in this game, I think, helped what I'd call maybe a minor criticism of Twilight Princess, which is that the slingshot felt a bit unnecessary.
Mm-hmm, because you get the bow so quick.
You get the bow in the Fire Temple, so you get it in the Goron Mines, which is the Fire Temple in that game.
So why would you use the slingshot?
You only have the slingshot for one temple, which you get it just before, and then after you get the bow, you never use it again, or at least I didn't, because the bow and arrow was just so much better. You didn't have to work out the arc of your shot or anything, because he just went in a straight line.
Neither of us got far enough to use the whip, but out of the beetle, the gust blows, and the mitts, I'd say those are the three solid new items. Which would you say is your favourite?
Oh, the beetle. Easy.
Yeah?
Especially after you get the first upgrade to the beetle and it can pick up bombs, because it gives you more options for clearing out enemies. So, especially if there's like bomb plants nearby, You can just fly and you can take them all out from a distance, or you can go and face them one-on-one. I think it expands the 3D Zelda gameplay in quite an interesting way. Like, the digging mitts, you could say, are just an extension of the shovel, which has been in quite a few of the 2D games before.
That's fair enough.
And what was the other one you said?
The gust blower.
The gust blower is kind of weird. Like, it's interesting, but it feels like I was like, this it's a bit of an odd item, but I guess Zelda's known for having its odd items, so I did appreciate it. It's more, I know it better as a annoying item in Smash Bros.
I've got to admit, I agree with you with the beetle. There's a couple of occasions where it wasn't needed for gameplay, but I would equip it just to check out what was happening in the next room or the next section, or even if I was stuck, just to look around the room to try and get a better angle.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It's really good for looking at things from different angles and stuff like that. And it's just a cool device. It's got a cool look to it, and it feels like a natural extension of Link's abilities.
As we're talking about items, I wanted to talk about the shields as well, and the swords. It feels like, again, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Breath of the Wild in this one. It just feels like Breath of the Wild took this all to the next step. Because, of course, you've got the wooden shield, and then you can upgrade it.
Yes.
You've got the iron shield, upgrade it. The sacred shield, upgrade it. And, of course, eventually the Hylian shield. So you also have the different swords. You've got the practice sword, goddess long sword, goddess white sword, master sword, and the true master sword. Now, some of this was upgraded through the story, and some of it was through the guy in Skyloft. So, like the shields, you could upgrade it, which was pretty cool. So that whole upgrade in your weaponry and also working your way through weaponry, I feel like it's been touched on in early Zelda games, like in Ocarina of Time. If you took a wooden shield to a fire temple, it would burn if it got hit by fire. But it's really been developed more into Breath of the Wild.
I think it's like, you can see where Breath of the Wild gets it from. I think this is one of the ideas that feels a little bit half-baked in this game, because upgrades, I'll say, like, the ability for weapons to break is only the shield, I think, in this game.
Oh, okay.
Or at least what I experienced of the game. I don't know if there's a late game item that can break. And that was more annoying than Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the Wild, at least, you could hold
so many items.
You had more slots.
Yeah.
So if you broke your shield, I'll just get out my next shield.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it was a pain to have to keep going back up to Skyloft for a new shield, especially if you'd upgraded it. Because for that second temple, the fire temple, I know there is a fire temple later on. I mean, the first fire temple that you go to. It burned up, and then I just didn't bother getting another shield, because I was like, if I get one, it's just going to burn up.
Yeah, I suppose.
So I just did that entire dungeon without it. And also, I had upgraded that first one, but then I had to buy a basic wooden shield again.
Yeah, you have to start from the beginning again.
And it's just stuff like that just makes it not very, like, the backtracking to have to get it
is a lot more annoying. Whereas Breath of the Wild really sorted that out.
Because you can just find them.
Yeah, they're literally littered everywhere. The problem is normally because you don't have enough slots to hold them all.
Yeah. So I think that's it's like the beginning of a good idea, but I felt it was a little bit half-baked in this game. I didn't particularly go with it very well.
That's fair enough. So we went on a little bit of a detour with the items and the swords and the shields. Going back to the gameplay, previous rumours were flying around about the flying element, were pushed further in an interview with Aonuma and Miyamoto preceding the Nintendo E3 press conference in 2008. Aonuma basically said the sky plays a key element. He was so freaking eager to talk about this game, wasn't he? He was literally sitting there like, I want to talk about this game so much. Shut up.
It's funny because in comparison, as of time of release, we still don't even know what Breath of the Wild 2 is called.
No, we don't. All we've seen is a little trailer.
And he comes on and he gives updates, but I reckon his updates are very strictly scripted now.
Scripted after this.
Because, yeah, literally, like, Breath of the Wild 2, we've only still had, like, 2 trailers total?
Yeah.
And it's been just, like, real drip feed of information. And the reason is because they're like, if we told you Breath of the Wild 2's subtitle, it would give too much away. Whereas here's like Aonuma, he's just started working this new game. He's like, it's in the sky. You could almost say it's Skyward.
He also mentioned that the new Zelda isn't as big as Twilight Princess, but rather more dense and in depth. He meant isn't as big as far as the physical places to go. So
yes,
dude, Miyamoto must have given such a telling off. Like, dude, seriously.
But it is. I don't know. It was one of those things that's very apparent. Like I say, I didn't play this one as a kid. Only Vicky did. But it was immediately apparent. Like, now, because I played it after Breath of the Wild had already come out. I only played the HD re-release. So it was almost ultra apparent to me from the get-go. It was sandwiched between Twilight Princess, which was very big game. You know, it had huge areas. Sometimes the areas were just very big, but didn't really have much to them, such as like
more vast than anything else.
Yeah, like the ice area in Twilight Princess. You basically have to follow the defined route through it, but it seems very big. Whereas Skyloft, by comparison, feels very small, and also feels like this is like the only we talked about this all the way back in our Ocarina of Time episode about the idea of like a hub world in a 3D Zelda, because obviously they're going to do that for Zelda 64 at the time.
Yes.
This is a hub world.
Yeah. Skyward and Skyloft is the hub world of Skyward Sword.
Which almost feels like a step back to me. But then, obviously, they then turn that on its head, and it's open world for Breath of the Wild. So it's really interesting how these things change.
So as you go through the game, once you get past the temple that I know you're on, there's an area in the sky that becomes available to you. It's not a big area, it's just more of a plot device area, but then it requires you to go back to the areas that you've been to get, a bit like Twilight Princess, to see in different sections and find there's more in the original sections. So I do feel that this game, I can see how this game followed Twilight Princess in that respect, because Twilight Princess, you'd have the forest, you go on your adventures, then you come back to the forest, but you were able to go sideways into the Lost Woods like you weren't able to do before you met Midna, stuff like that. So this does have that element to it.
I think that's the only major place where you could really say that happens, though. Because you obviously go back to Zora's Domain to get to the Ice Mountain. You have to go through Lake Hylia to get, obviously, fired out the cannon to the desert.
Yeah.
It's only really the Temple of Time in my mind where it's actually you're going through that same area again.
See, I always considered the water temple. We're talking about the wrong game here, but
we've already done this episode. This episode's already out. You can listen to our thoughts on Twilight Princess.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't divert. We should stay on Skyward Sword, but that's an element to this game that you haven't experienced yet because you haven't got that far in the game.
Yeah, it's obvious though, because walking around the desert, you can see the claw shot pads.
Yeah, and I'm guessing walking around the Forest of Green area, you could see that kind of like that gate that was all closed off. That's an element. You could,
and also on the map, you can see that there's other areas that come off of those areas that I've been to.
There's also an element, you go through this sort of portal into like a Shadow Realm-esque. They don't call it the Shadow Realm, but it reminds me a lot of Twilight Princess because the way you interact with your surroundings and what you have to do can be similar to those black creatures in the Twilight Realm. And being in the Twilight Realm as you are in Hyrule, but it's just the Twilight Realm version of it instead of the Hyrule version of it. So they do have that element in this game as well. So you can see the links. So going back to 2008, we do divert a little bit, but it's all Zelda related, so it's all good. Aonuma also mentioned, he had more spoilers, also mentioned that the Wii Motion Plus was not originally intended to be used with the Skyward Sword because the controls weren't working well, which I don't, why didn't they just know? So they knew it wasn't working well. It's just like, I don't mind if they had made this Wii Motion Plus
optional.
Optional. Like one of those lovely games that you could use it if you wanted to. Not that you could only use it for, but I suppose I'd be having issues with it because you'd still have to use the Wii controller as the sword.
Yeah. Maybe there should be a game like Link's Crossbow Training that used the Wii Motion Plus, and like Skyward Sword remained like using the regular Wii controls, and was maybe a bit less emphasis on the motion controls.
Maybe.
That way it's more of a, like, it's more tech demo-y rather than you have to get a handle. You have to like get a handle.
You have to get a handle on this control system, or you can't play the game. Basically.
Yeah.
So it wasn't working well, but when Wii Sports Resort came out, it worked perfectly for that game, so they re-implemented it. Well, that's like comparing freaking 5-course dinner compared to a starter. It's loads of little short games. We've literally just said that. It's loads of little short games. No wonder it worked for like 5 minutes compared to a full-length game.
30-hour game, yeah.
Miyamoto has further stated that the Wii Motion Plus will not be used for every item in the game, saying that the item and weapon control will carefully weigh to see how Motion Plus sensor bar can make it for an optional control scheme. So that's why some of it did and some of it didn't require. But I did, as you said, I did like the rolling of the bomb. That was an interesting concept. Yeah, it was definitely questionable.
That sounded like a list that was going to have more than one item on it, and then you just kind of stopped and like, actually no, that was it.
Bomb. That's it. That's all. This was the first and currently only Zelda adventure where it's indicated by a damage meter that Link's shield is taking damage under enemy attack. Of course, that has now changed with Breath of the Wild. Because of this, Link will have to use more strategic ways of defending against enemies, and if the shield gets damaged in battle, he'll have to go and buy a new one or it get mended. Again, we've already covered that bit, so that's fine.
But I think this is still the only one with an actual gauge, isn't it?
Does it not have a gauge in Breath? I just assumed there was a gauge in Breath of the Wild.
I think Breath of the Wild just gives you a warning. Doesn't it? It'll say your shield is getting weak or your sword is getting weak or something, and then it'll break a few uses later.
So now we're going to go into a bit more detailed into gameplay with the overworld and the dungeons. Skyward Sword features a new map that's a lot easier to follow than any previous attempt, according to Miyamoto and Aonuma. This should cut down the amount of time that you spend lost. Moreover, since some previous Zelda games have been focusing on things like story and dungeons, this title is more focused on fun. That's a direct quote. That is just like hilarious. I love it. It's more fun, focused on fun. Thanks, guys.
I think it's definitely like some sections were like, I know it was more easy to get around, but some sections almost felt painfully linear. Like it didn't feel like there was any branching paths at all. But then I act as if previous Zeldas weren't like that. Like, at the end of the day, there was only one path up to Zora's Domain in Ocarina of Time. And having stuff like the dowsing to show you the right way is actually, it's quite clever game design.
I think the comparison that I'm thinking of right now is, again, Twilight Princess. Going back to that, please check out our very first episode of this season to get a full feeling of the Twilight Princess game. But in comparison to this game, it felt like a more complete world. Like, even though you had to go up to, say, see the Gorons on the top of the mine, you still had the town that the mine was connected to, and then how the town people were then known to the people who lived in Aurum Village, and there was that link to the lady in Hyrule Town. I don't know, it just felt a bit more of a community, a bit more of a world.
Yeah, it was an open world, but, you had sections where you had to defend the car as it went across Hyrule Field, which basically literally connected things. And also just you could see stuff on the horizon. Like, in most Zelda games, most 3D Zelda games where it exists, you can see Death Mountain in the distance. Mm. Or you could see, like, when you landed, you could see the desert from other areas.
Even if it wasn't the clearest in Ocarina of Time.
Or you could see the ice mountains from Zora's Domain, whereas this, each section felt like you were in a different world. Yeah, no, it felt very contained, as you were saying. So, but that was the thought behind it, so you would get less lost. In September 2010 issue of Nintendo Power, Aonuma once again spoke of trying to alter the traditional flow of the Zelda game. He mentioned that the development team tried to take some elements of a dungeon and actually move it out of those small connected rooms and into an area that's usually considered a field where there's not always a boss at the end of that area. So he was trying to think outside the box. It's a bit like certain games we're going to cover
such as Mario Sunshine.
Yeah. And
Hint. That someone is trying to think outside the box. Hey, it might not be well received, or it might not be what people are expecting, but you've got to give people kudos when they do try something new.
which is ironic because, you know, like, I've not played the entirety of Skyward Sword because I'm little nostalgia this week. But these temples to me felt like very Zelda temples.
Yeah.
They didn't feel like they were going against convention. They felt like 2D Zelda temples in some ways because of their focus on puzzles.
I suppose maybe he's trying to talk about more of what happens a bit later with the scales and getting those sacred flames, and the fact that you need to you can't open certain paths without doing little mini quests before you get to the temple.
Yeah, and having not all plot events linked to beating a temple.
Yeah, I suppose so. And trying to open it up. It just feels like it's trying to be more open, but in a different sense.
Yeah.
To a traditional. So you can see a bit where he's coming from, even if it didn't work out completely like that. Talking about gameplay, moving on to the flying. As revealed during the E3 2011, Skyward Sword includes flight. Link can go to different regions in Skyloft by riding the Loft Wing, but only once he completes his flying training at the beginning of the game. In the minigame, which is used to teach a young hero how to fly properly, Link must catch a specific bird that is carrying a bird statue to prove his worth as a Knight of Skyloft and a Loft Wing rider. Controlling the Loft Wing is done similarly by controlling planes in Wii Sports Resort. Wii Sports Resort Air Sports games, as the gliding is achieved through the Wii Remote. What are our feelings with the Loft Wings?
Obviously this is only to do with the Switch version. Mm-hmm. When I started playing the Switch version, I thought I'd at least try doing it the traditional way, and I had my Joy-Cons in each hand, got to the flying section and the controls. I could not literally do it, so I switched to the controls where you just press A to flap the wings and you can just use the control stick because it's just so much better. The Loft Wings are a cool idea, but again, it doesn't capture the same magic for me as the King of Red Lions in the Wind Waker, say. So,
in the Wind Waker, of course, you've got the ocean, like you have the sky in Skyloft, a big, dense area to explore. As I do agree. The ocean felt like an adventure. It felt like you kept on finding mini islands and little areas and tornadoes, and there was a lot of little things to find completely outside of gameplay. Whereas there is stuff like that in Skyward Sword, but I don't know, you can find the edge of the map so much quicker and so much. Maybe it's just the time. Even if you play, we will go more into Wind Waker later on, hint hint, but even if you upgrade in the later version of the game with the red sail,
well, in the HD version, the fast sail.
Version, yeah, that's the one. The HD version with the fast sail, you still don't get across the map very quickly, and it still takes you a while to get places.
Yeah, if you go from one end of the map to the other, it will take you a while to sail there.
Where if you flew on your Loft Wing, it wouldn't take a lot of time. And I think that's a big thing. The size of it, to the time it takes to do stuff, makes it feel smaller.
And it might be a real petty gripe. Obviously, I know with the Wii, they didn't have the most power. But the thing about sailing as well is that they were loading in the environments from a distance as you were coming towards them. It was immediately noticeable to me, I don't know about you, that when you hop on the Loft Wing, even on the HD version, you're waiting for a second whilst it's clearly loading the new environment. And then when you're flying around, that's a different map.
Yeah, it is. Because there's a gap between you jumping onto Skyloft and then actually like floating down.
Yeah, and I don't know if when you're flying over you noticed, but I could tell it was a slightly less detailed version of Skyloft when you're flying around the air.
Yeah.
And as a result, it felt a lot less immersive. It was a lot less seamless than Wind Waker. You hop on the boat, you sail, you're gone.
And you literally jump on the island.
No loading screens.
No loading screen. Just on, off sort of thing.
Whereas Skyward Sword, there is a moment, like, it's not even a long loading screen, so it's probably, you know, you'd be right maybe in the comments to call me being petty about it, but you literally, it fades to white and then it fades back in, and you're very clearly in the flying map now. You're not on the ground map, you're in the flying map, and it just wasn't quite as effective for me.
So moving on to the actual timeline placement, I'm going to do a little bit about the timeline before getting into the actual story. Hopefully, our dear listeners, if you're watching a series about Zelda game, that you hopefully would have checked out Hyrule Historia. If not, do so immediately. I don't mind if you pause this video, go and order it on Amazon or whatever, and then come back and listen to the rest, because Hyrule Historia is amazing for any Zelda fan or general person who wants to look up some random information about the Zelda franchise. This is what I mean by timeline placement, because even though Skyward Sword was a later game in the franchise, the Hyrule Historia has actually made an official timeline of all the Zelda games and has put Skyward Sword at the very first. It is the reason why Link, Zelda and Ganondorf are stuck in this everlasting battle, which I think is pretty cool.
Do you think it's, like, now we're looking back, because Hyrule Historia has been out now almost a decade, I think. I think it came out around the time of Skyward Sword.
So if you haven't got it, well, it did, because it had all that extra information about Skyward Sword at the front, because that had been the latest, which at the time was slightly annoying.
It was all to do with the 25th anniversary.
Yes.
And we're now at the 35th anniversary.
So if you don't have it, then shame on you, and you should have it. It's like a decade, so go.
But no, what I was going to ask is, do you think, in retrospect, having a Zelda timeline restricts the freedom of future Zelda games? Because Breath of the Wild, notably, just kind of ignored the Zelda timeline. Like, I think it takes place just somewhere random. Like, oh yeah, Breath of the Wild somewhere. I honestly can't remember where its official placement is. I
did like the timeline, though. I can see what you're saying, but it was nice to give the games that are already out a linear... It was nice to have that definition, but I suppose it's a bit like giving Joker from DC World, Batman's nemesis. It's like giving him a backstory. Most of the time, it was quite enjoyable just having him as a mystery man who's just insane. But by giving him a backstory, it kind of it's good because it gives him a backstory, but ruins it. So I do see what you mean. I do like the timeline, because I think it makes sense as well until you start adding new Zelda games.
Well, also, like, there was very clearly a good idea for two of the Ocarina of Time being a splitting point. I think is a really good idea. The idea of the hero falling in Ocarina of Time creating a new timeline is also a very good idea. The fact that one of the hero falling timeline, I'm pretty sure, is just the catch-all for all the Zelda games where it wasn't immediately obvious where they went.
Yeah. If it doesn't fit in A and B, it can go in C.
Wind Waker alludes to in its opening, like, that it follows one of the timelines. Like, you can very clearly see that link, no pun intended. And Twilight Princess, it's very heavily implied it's the same Ganondorf, which means he was detained, which means it comes after the child period. In the Wind Waker, they prayed for the hero of time to come back, and he didn't, and that's the adult one, because obviously he gets sent back to the past. So that's very obvious, and it's kind of planned in. The original Legend of Zelda, they're like, it goes somewhere.
And they're probably doing that, as you said, they're probably doing that the same with Breath of the Wild. Potentially, that's when the hero failed, and there hasn't been someone for thousands and millions of years until along came Link.
And then obviously now we're getting a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, so it won't be something that comes around again. But do you think it could end up being restrictive to future games to have to work? Like, clearly they've already shown they're not going to let it get in the way, which I think is good. Yeah,
they're not going to make a game purely so it fits in the timeline. That timeline feels like it was purely made for the fans. But at the same time, whenever they bring out a new game, regardless what the game is, fans will be saying, where does it fit in the timeline?
I think as well, yeah. I think beforehand, fans were asking for a timeline. They were given a timeline, and now they're like,
where is it?
Where does the new game go in the timeline, though? So it's almost as if they released it to stop them from getting the questions, but they're still going to get the questions.
Double-edged sword. But I bring up the Hyrule Historia because the Skyward Sword in-game storyline establishes itself as the first game in the known Zelda timeline, exploring the beginning of the battle between good and evil within the legend, and establishing its key players, Zelda, the incarnation of the goddess Hyrule, Link, the hero chosen by the goddess, and Ganondorf, the manifestation of the Demon King Demise hatred. Dun dun dun. So start that internal battle. I wasn't going to go too heavily into the story. Generally, Skyward Sword, even though it does, some of the gameplay is different from a traditional Zelda, but this is quite simply Link and Zelda are best mates. Zelda goes missing, falls down into the land below the clouds because at the moment they're separated. Do I have to go into a bit more detail than that?
We can just cover off the key story beats. Like you say, Link in this one is just a knight at an academy. So he's just a knight training, which has been his backstory in a few games now.
He's very kind of simple, your standard guy. There's nothing special about him. He happens to be best mates with Zelda, who, to be fair, is not a princess. But even though she's not a princess, she's still the daughter of
the headmaster.
The headmaster. So it's not even like, but do they have a leader? Is the headmaster the leader? Because they never really define someone as the leader of Skyloft. He's just called the headmaster, but there's no other leader.
He's the one that's most involved in the plot. And it seems like on Skyloft, you're either a merchant or you're a knight. And that's like the two things you do. Like nothing else exists.
But then that's a critique on the size again, isn't it? How small Skyloft feels.
And then, so he's probably the de facto leader because the main thing there is the Knight Academy.
Yeah.
So, anyway, and
so she's
Link,
the daughter.
Link is established. I did like how in the prologue, everyone, apart from Zelda, is like, Link, you're a fucking dope.
You're a lazy son of a gun. Get off your back and actually do something.
I think it's almost the most extreme in this one compared to any other Zelda. Because, like, in Ocarina, he's shown to just be sleeping. It's just like, okay, get up and go see the Great Deku Tree. But he's just like any other Kakiri, really. It's just he happens to be asleep at the beginning.
Yeah.
He's just like an older brother taking a nap in Wind Waker. He's a hard-working farmhand in Twilight Princess. This one, he's just like a bit of a dopey student who, from
Isn't
the like
taking things seriously enough.
Yeah, well, just kind of like very happy-go-lucky, and it's nice characterization. But it did mean when like Groose was like, "This kid, he's a fucking dope." I was like, fair.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with this right now.
Like Zelda, it does seem like Zelda just pulls him out of trouble all the time.
Very basically, the people on the Skyloft are separated from the world below due to the thick layer of clouds because that has been overtaken. The goddess Hyrule did it ages ago to kind of protect them.
I guess spoiler alert if you shouldn't be listening to this if you don't know the game. But basically there was a war between Hylia and Demise, and in order to protect the people, Hylia puts them on Skyloft, I'm pretty sure. Yes. And then seals them off. The war takes place on the land. Hylia does seal away Demise, but basically then becomes reincarnated as Zelda.
Hylia knew the seal of evil would not hold forever, so that's why she kind of gave up her immortality to be reincarnated as a mortal Hylian.
Because an immortal being can't wield the Master Sword, I want to say.
Yeah.
Or an immortal being... And she just knows an immortal being wouldn't be able to stop Demise permanently. It needs to be a mortal Hylian, so that's why she gives up her immortality. And essentially the story is, obviously, as always in these games, Link and Zelda discovering who their heritage or whatever. Obviously, they're the first ones, but they're discovering their destinies.
Zelda gets kidnapped.
A lot of the first half of the game is just trying to find Zelda.
Yeah.
And then, like we say, then it goes on to the second half, which is kind of Link having to power up the Master Sword and become, like, the true hero. But in terms of the mythos, yeah, it's essentially everyone's in the sky because there is a great war on the land and the people were basically sent there to protect them.
Now, I quite like Impa's character in all this, because you see her as an old lady and you also see her as a young lady as well. I like that concept. She's there to support Zelda, to save Zelda, and to kind of guide her on the right path into defeating Demise. And the kind of breaking point after the third, like, kind of standard temple is that they go through, like, this portal in time, and that's Link is trying to join them, and that's why he's trying to power up so he can go through the time portal as well, to help defeat Demise. But I do like how Impa is portrayed. The design of Impa as an old lady, they tried to make her look like a, you know how they used to tell the time by the sun?
A sundial.
They tried to make her look like one of those.
That's interesting.
Because of the way her body is, and the way her hat goes all the way up, and the way her hair hangs, it was supposed to really emphasize the time element. So she was supposed to look like a sundial, like in a form, because then her shadow would be quite straight.
Yeah.
Where she was sitting. So I thought that was quite an interesting way.
I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't told me. But...
No, it's not overly obvious, but it's an interesting way to go across the design.
And also the time doesn't... There's no time system in this game, is there? No, as in, to get to nighttime in Skyloft, you have to sleep.
Yes, no, there's no item that controls time, but time does play an element in this game.
But I mean, like, the flow of day to night, if you stood somewhere, it wouldn't eventually become night.
Oh, no, it wouldn't. If you want to do nighttime quests, you have to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a general story. We've kind of touched on how that's similar and different to other Zelda games. So I think I'm going to move on to the graphics of the game. Now, we've been comparing it quite a lot because there are two games that we're covering in this season of Twilight Princess and Wind Waker. Now, we won't go obviously into either of those two games because they have their own videos. It's hard not to talk about a Zelda game without talking about some other Zelda games. It's just impossible because there's certain elements that are quite comical and quite similar, and there's certain elements it's nice to see a difference.
Yeah.
As we come to graphics, Twilight Princess was a grittier, more realistic, and I do feel that this game looks... the title incorporates a mixture of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess because it's a realistic elements, but in lighter tones. It's a lot lighter, a lot more softer tones.
I really like how this game looks in general.
It doesn't look bad,
I think
does it?
it's got nice designs to it. Like you say, I think it's a nice middle ground. I think Twilight Princess was maybe a bit too trying to go for the realism, which I don't know how well that's gonna age compared to Wind Waker, which still looks brilliant. And to be honest, I think the HD version of Skyward Sword, I think, again, it makes things look a bit more defined, but Skyward Sword is already a pretty good looking game, so...
But, however, September 2010 issue of Nintendo Power, Aonuma mentioned that neither style contributed towards the choice of art style of the game. It didn't have anything to do with Wind Waker or Twilight Princess. It was simply focused on the swordplay. That was the main focus, so they designed it around the swordplay and how things looked from the swordplay element, and that's how they got the design.
How? What? Well, I suppose you want it to look...
They simply chose it since the developers are focused on swordplay, meaning that they wanted to make the swordplay accessible and clear to the user. So that's why they chose it for the realistic view, and the colour system was to make the swordplay easier to see and to gauge.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, like, the sword's got a lot of blues and purples, and the world itself doesn't really have as many. It's a lot of greens and reds and stuff, so I guess the sword always stands out in each environment.
Yeah.
Or at least my experience is that.
Well, the lighter shade, of course, linking to the Wind Waker of the game, it made such enemies as Okoroks, Deku Babas and Boblikins were apparent during gameplay at the conference in order to further explain the motion capabilities of the sword with the Motion Plus. So it's very good in their demonstrations. And the weapons the way the weapons felt during combat. In terms of the overworld, an open forest like the area that was, like the first area you go into, it housed a large central tree, multiple colourful attributes such as mushrooms, foliage. It showed the definition in a more realistic way, like Twilight Princess. So yeah. I'm not surprised I went that way. I'm not surprised a lot of people did see it as having that element.
Yeah.
It was also influenced by Miyamoto's love of Impressionism, and the skies in the games are a tribute to Senez, which must be a certain Impressionist artist. So that's why the sky looked the way it did. Plenty of visual cues to identify enemy attacks and weaknesses will have been given, and full realism wouldn't work for these kind of cues from a game developer's perspective. So because it does have those cues, they were saying that you can't go fully realistic with it. So the best way to kind of balance that out was to over-exaggerate the character design. Well, you've mentioned Groose already.
Yeah.
Well, you can't say that. I mean, there's certain characters in all Zelda games that you look at and go, okay.
You know when Groose is loose.
Yeah, you do know when Groose is loose. But yeah, it's interesting that they didn't consider it just happened to go that way rather than being specifically designed. Their pure focus, if you think of the game and how it is played, was on the motion control and the sword play and how that
it's
felt.
gameplay-led design, which I think is really important.
Yeah, because to be fair, I personally feel it's the motion control that ruins a game, but that doesn't affect how it looks to play, and it's always looked really good. The frustrating bit is when you like whack it down and it doesn't do it on the freaking screen and you die. That's the frustrating bit.
Yeah.
Moving on to music-wise, the Skyward Sword was fully orchestrated, with Miyamoto saying that Nintendo couldn't do what it did with Galaxy 2 and not do the same with the next Zelda. So because they orchestrated Super Mario Galaxy 2, they felt that they had to do it with the next Zelda franchise.
Well, they talked about it for Twilight Princess, just referencing our other episode. Obviously, there's areas in Twilight Princess where you wouldn't be able to do it with an orchestra, like the Twilight Realm. Whereas this, almost the skyward nature of it, I think, almost lends itself to an orchestra quite well.
Yes, very much. Yeah, I do like the music in Skyward Sword.
I think Ballad of the Goddess, like the main theme, and obviously it is, it's referenced a lot in the music and the tones throughout. I think that's a really nice track.
Mm. There was, however, an interview with Aonuma stating that there was questions whether to use an orchestrated music had still not been answered when one of the E3s came up, like the 2010 E3 came up. Moreover, Aonuma said that he was actually surprised at Miyamoto's response during the roundtable, saying that he hadn't had a chance to talk to Miyamoto for his approval and that he might tell Aonuma that he was just joking around. So he half expected him to be like, psych. No. Yeah, we're going to use a full orchestra. Psych.
Look at their faces.
I do love that obvious teamwork and stuff like that comes through listening to interviews that they had together and the way they talk together. They're obviously two people very comfortable with each other and are very used by this point to working together. You can tell that in the way that they were. Well,
Aonuma, Miyamoto created Zelda, and then it was Majora's Mask was when Aonuma properly took over because he directed Majora's Mask and he put it together in a year, and it's after that he properly became series producer. So it makes sense that they've got like a strong rapport because Aonuma once upon a time I guess he still does work for Miyamoto because I imagine if Miyamoto says something, that word is law. But it is, you can see that they're two people that have worked together for lots of years and clearly work quite well in sync. Well, when they know what the other person's talking about.
And when they're not trying to kick each other underneath the table. The composer for this was actually the same composer who did Super Mario Galaxy. So we've talked about the early development. We've talked about the timeline placement, a bit about the story, a lot about the Wii Motion Plus. We're at that point where reception. The game received universal acclaim, gaining a Metacritic rating of 93 out of 100. It attained a perfect score from IGN, 10 out of 10, and a 98% from the UK official Nintendo magazine. It was tied with Ocarina of Time 3D for the magazine's highest ever review score. However, GameSpot rated it lower than previous games in the series, giving it a score of 7.5 out of 10. Fans have praised the new combat system, but have complained about the free roaming in the sky, saying that it lacked more interesting places to explore. We've actually already covered that. In addition, the game has been criticised for being too linear.
Which we've mentioned as well.
The game sold over 2 million copies worldwide on the month it was released. As of March 2012, the game has sold 3.52 million copies worldwide. I'm not going to do a more recent thing because that would be affected by the HD one, which we'll go into a little bit. But, so it's actually really well received, which I was surprised about because of the issue with the motion control. But I suppose it depends how annoying you found it. And it was a good concept. I still stand by that. It was a good concept.
Conceptually, it's very strong, and yeah, just maybe...
And it looked good, but what we said about linear and the flying, they obviously agreed with.
Yeah, conceptually very strong. I know there's people out there that don't mind the motion control, so that's fine. So yeah, I'm not particularly too surprised about it. I think I remember it getting good reviews, because obviously I got it for you, so I wouldn't have got you a game that was reviewing terribly. That'd be very harsh.
I've heard this is a bit rubbish. Enjoy.
Hey, I've heard this is really disappointing. Happy birthday.
Now we've got to my favourite part of Big Nostalgia, the quirks. Skyward Sword is said to have taken the longest development period in the history of the franchise. Guess how long the development period was for this Zelda game?
Came out in 2011. The other game was a launch title for the Wii. 5 years?
Hey, good guess. But yeah, that's the longest development period in history of any Zelda game.
Hasn't that been overtaken though?
Is it Breath of the Wild?
Because Breath of the Wild then came out in 2017, I want to say, which would make it 6 years. And sequel to Breath of the Wild is still not out in Year of Our Lord 2022. So that's also at 6 years. That might even be the longest game when it comes out eventually, Breath of the Wild 2. But it really depends, because they've done the handheld ones in between and the re-releases. So, because I think I saw that fact, and I did think the same thing, whether it's still true. Yeah, okay, I just typed in longest development of a Zelda game, and it says, so this is from cheatsheet.com, and it says, the Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 delay breaks series record for longest development time between console games.
Oh, fair enough. Upon its North American release, a special edition Skyward Sword bundle became available at the price of $69.99. The bundle includes a copy of Skyward Sword, as well as a gold Wii Remote Plus. Additionally, a limited edition CD featuring the music from Legend of Zelda 25th Anniversary Symphony concerts is also packaged alongside an early purchase of the standard and special edition copies of Skyward Sword, which I thought was pretty cool. For a special bundle that's involved. I do feel as time has progressed, the bundles and what's included has gone down, because I actually got Skyward Sword HD as a special bundle. I got keyring.
Did you not even get the Joy-Cons?
No,
the Joy-Cons were separate, weren't they? They weren't even
Joy-Cons
bundled
were separate.
in.
I got the tin. I've got the tin from Skyward Sword, and I've got a keyring. That was a special added bonus for going through the Nintendo website.
Yeah,
It wasn't good enough. Compared to what I would have loved a bit of 25th Anniversary Symphony concerts. I know it wasn't the 25th anniversary when the HD came out, but it would have been cool to have the CD.
I mean, we could do a whole nother video on how disappointing Nintendo's music releases have been over the years.
And how disappointing their bundles are these days. It would have been cool to have the controllers. That would have been very cool.
Well, I'm trying to remember what it was that came with Pikmin 3 Deluxe. It was something... It was glasses wipes. I'm pretty sure it was...
Glasses wipes?
I'm pretty sure it was a Pikmin 3 branded glasses wipe or something like that. Was the thing that you'd get through Nintendo's store.
Yeah, didn't you say something about like one of them being like a water bottle?
Yes, there was also I wonder if then
that's not good
it's just
enough.
tat.
It's just something silly that they just put the brand on and been like, oh look, special. It's not good enough, Nintendo. Take it. You used to be able to do great bundles.
To be fair, Metroid Dread got a good one.
What did they get?
So Metroid Dread got an art book, and it got like special like cards for each of and it got a steel book.
An art book? I would have loved that. Oh, that would have been so cool.
Do you have Metroid Dread yet, or are you just talking in general?
I'm talking for Zelda franchise.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, for Metroid Dread. We could do it. That's free for video. I did. You could do a whole thing about being disappointed in a release of music. You could do a whole video and being disappointed in extra bits with bundles. You could do a whole extra video on you could do a little list of the randomness rubbish that you get these comparing it to old bundles. Like, for example, even when the Switch came out and you bundled it with a couple of games, it was still the same price as buying the Switch and buying those games. There's no even bundles like those anymore.
Yeah. Well, with Mario Party Superstars, I got some coasters. They were just in a box somewhere, because I already have Mario-themed coasters.
Yeah, like anyone should.
And then, yeah, because a lot of these just say free gift next to them on the Nintendo store. It doesn't even say what they are. You're just, I guess, gonna find out.
When we were talking about music earlier, you know the main theme of Skyward Sword, known as the Ballad of the Goddesses?
Yep.
It's the orchestration of Zelda's lullaby played in reverse.
I think I did know that. I think that's really cool.
It is pretty cool. And it's a nice little nod, and I think it works really well.
Yeah, and also it's just a good tune. Like we've already said, it is maybe one of the most memorable things about the game, and this is a game with quite a lot of cool, memorable iconography in it, even if we don't go with the controls very much.
This is the second game in the Zelda series that requires an external accessory. The first being Majora's Mask in the Nintendo 64 version, which required the expansion pack to play. I never really thought about that, and I suppose it was something that I was aware of when we played the Nintendo 64 version, but I've majorly played Majora's Mask either on emulators or on the 3DS. So when I think of accessories that affect game control, I normally think of this, but it's interesting to think Majora's Mask also had one. It just didn't have anything to do with the actual gameplay.
Also, the expansion pack was kind of hidden away. Like, you stuck it in the front of the console and then you didn't take it out.
Yeah, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like changing controllers or the actual... Yeah, it didn't really affect gameplay at all in comparison.
Well, it just gave the console more power to do more with the game, but it's a background boost rather than something that you actively see whilst you're playing.
Another fact is, despite the earliest game in the timeline, the Hyrule of Skyward Sword is one of the most futuristic Zelda games in the series, having some of the most advanced technology yet, with an entire dungeon staffed by ancient robots and the existence of a large mining corporation that created the dungeon and its robotic people in it. So I always thought about that in that particular temple, and you know the temple I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That there was potential, all our talk earlier about the timelines and stuff like that, there was potential of there being one even earlier than Skyward Sword, but it wouldn't fit in with the whole Hyrulean goddess and all this sort of stuff with demise. It'd have to be like the Minish Cap or something like that. It'd have to be a side story.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely... It's ironic that they're like, this is the first Zelda game in the timeline, but there's still room for there to be a first Zelda game in the timeline. But I suppose, unless you have an interesting story to tell, you don't want to have a game that's literally just there to do setup of mining corporations and things. I did think the technology was cool, and also you can see where the technology, especially in that temple, you can see where those design concepts lead on to Breath of the Wild.
Oh, definitely. Definitely agree. So the American box art from Skyward Sword contains Hyrulean languages from Twilight Princess, even though Skyward Sword introduces a new Hylian language. Twilight Princess Hylian is also scarcely featured within the game. So it's really weird that it's on the box art, but nowhere else, basically.
So I imagine that might just be what the graphics team had
to hand.
Yeah. Maybe the marketing team just went and did it, rather than try and get hold, or maybe they weren't able to get hold of the new type font or whatever, or maybe it was just too difficult to work with, so they just used what they had.
So some of these facts have obviously been written before Breath of the Wild was like a game, but I feel that this one is still true. This is the first time the names Din, Fair, and Naru, the goddesses' names, Neru, are mentioned in the same game as Faron, Eldin, and Lanra? Laneru. But it's the first time all 6 names are used in the same game. Because obviously in Twilight Princess they're not.
Well, it'd still be the first game, even if they were in Breath of the Wild. But yeah, so Ocarina uses Din, Farour, and Nairo. And then Twilight Princess introduces Eldin, Farour, and the others as the light spirits. So yeah, it would be the first one.
The other one.
Et al. There's 4 light spirits in Twilight Princess.
Yeah, but there's only 3 here.
Only 3 of them get referenced here, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's 3 light spirits.
You only do the light collection for 3 of them, but you've got Ordona, or Ordone. You got the first one.
Oh, yeah, the sheep.
You got like a ram, you got a monkey. We've done that episode already. You got a snake.
Yeah, let's stop talking about Twilight. Anyway, but apparently this was the first time all those names were used in the same game.
I imagine if you looked at Breath of the... It might be a case in Breath of the Wild you have name... A lot of places in Breath of the Wild have references in their names to characters and from other games. But yeah, it's probably the only game still where they've been major story elements, all of them.
Now this fact... We know dear old Tingle, don't we? Dear old Tingle from the Zelda franchise. So apparently the divisions of the Skyward Sword surface worlds into the 3 separate provinces that Link must dive into in the sky is very similar to the divisions of the freshly picked Tingle's Roseberry Rupee Land in the 3 continents that are only accessible if Tingle uses his Tingle balloons from the top of the Rupee Tower. Just like, boo. Why are you making me think of that game?
It was never even released outside of Japan, I don't think, was it?
No.
Like, Japan was the only place where Tingle was popular.
Yeah, to be fair, yeah. Everyone else is just like, no. Well, everyone else who is me. I don't know. Let us know about your feelings about Tingles in the comments below, because it's always interesting to... A bit like Jar Jar Binks. It's always interesting to see if anyone's a fan or not. Another quirk is the game-ending glitch occurs if the quest for the Song of the Hero is done in a certain way. This promoted the release of the Skyward Sword Save Data Update channel.
Because I guess they needed to fix it.
Yeah. Skyward Sword is the first 3D Zelda game on a home console where day and night do not alternate on their own. The only way for time to progress in the game is having Link sleep in a bed in Skyloft, which we've talked about before.
Yeah.
This is the first Zelda game and the first 3D Zelda title to have a run feature without the need of an item such as the Pegasus boots. This was also the first Zelda game in the series to feature a stamina meter.
Yes, yeah, and that's another thing that's been where I feel like it was an interesting concept in this game, but it wasn't fully realised until Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
Because climbing in this game you can still only do where there's vines.
Yes.
Whereas obviously Breath of the Wild is the first one where you can just start climbing whatever you want.
Yeah. But that's where... Again, we're going off into a different Zelda game. I swear we're talking about Skyward Sword, but that's where the whole Breath of the Wild concept was leading to. Maybe one of these days... down the series, you never know, we'll listen back to this and be like, we just covered Breath of the Wild.
Once Breath of the Wild reaches the point of being nostalgic. Whereas I think it's still too recent.
Still a bit too unnostalgic, yeah. The Loftwing in the game takes inspiration from real animals. Apparently, there's a animal, now he's called a shoebill stork, and he lives in Africa, but his other name is a Belenosips rex.
Huh.
And that's where that's a real animal it takes inspiration from. But the tail of the Loftwing actually takes inspiration from a Shiba dog. The tail of a Shiba dog, because of the twist.
Ah.
The hair of the Loftwings in this game also matched their riders. If you look closely, the way their hair is parted at the front represents the rider that they have. And another Skyloft fact is that the people who live in Skyloft are designed and named, inspired by birds. For example, Groose for goose. You got Stritch, which would be ostrich, and Parrow, who would be sparrow. To kind of go in with that whole sky, bird, loft theme.
Yeah.
And gratitude crystals are based off a popular Japanese sweet called Konopito, which was actually a sweet all the way from the 16th century Japan, which is pretty cool.
And it's the same sweet that inspires Starbits in Super Mario Galaxy.
They really like those sweets over there.
Yeah.
So, if we move on to the sequels. So, when we're talking about Skyward Sword, yes, I have the big nostalgia for this game compared to Philip. I was very blessed to be given this game as a present from Philip. I did give it a go back in the day, but I did not. I got as far as the Fire Temple because I found it very
The first Fire Temple.
The first Fire Temple, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I found it very difficult to get my head around the controls. And I got as far as the first Fire Temple at the boss level. I did get as far as the boss, but it was not working. So unfortunately, it's a game that I've really, really desperately wanted to play, but I felt like I haven't been able to over the years. Now, of course, Skyward Sword HD was confirmed as part of the February the 17th, 2021 on Nintendo Direct, and it was released in July 16, 2021. And I was so excited that I ordered it off Nintendo directly. So I got the keyring, yay. And I have enjoyed playing it on the HD version purely because it is so much easier. The controls feel a bit more... I do prefer playing on handheld, the actual motion control, which takes away the whole concept in itself in a way. But I do like having that option as well. And I feel that's what it misses from the Wii version. You can play with the motion control, but you can have the option of playing it in a traditional Zelda game. It should have given you the option. And I felt I wasn't the only one, that a lot of people, even though it was very well received, I do feel that there are potentially a lot of people out there. So please comment if you're one of those people that was put off this game or did try and play this game back in their youth, but didn't get very far because of those dear old motion controls.
Or let us know if we're the problem and you prefer that original Wii controls.
Yeah, it definitely could be the problem. But going into the Skyward Sword HD version, the differences in graphics in that the game now has a standard resolution of 1080p and runs at a 60 FPS. The difference in gameplay elements include players can choose a replacement motion controls with button controls, allowing the game to be played in both handheld mode and on the Nintendo Switch Lite. The camera can be fully manipulated with the right stick when playing with the motion controls, also by pressing the L button while playing the button controls or in the handheld mode. So what I just said there about the different ways of playing it. Most of Phi's advice is now optional and must be triggered manually. Dialogues can be fast forward by pressing the A button, so you can skip all her. Because, let's be honest, that's a character we haven't gone into too much yet. I do like Phi's character, and I like her linked to the Master Sword. I think it's a really lovely concept. But she's as annoying as Navi.
She is worse than Navi.
You'd say she's worse?
She's far worse. Phi is maybe the worst companion of any Zelda game because some of the advice is just
rubbish.
You'll be down to 2 hearts and it'll be like flashing. It'll be like, you're gonna give me a hint to fight this baddie, and Phi goes, "You've lost a lot of hearts. You should maybe do something about that." Thanks. Yeah, I've noticed.
Can I have some help, please?
I realise that, and then like everything's done really vaguely. It's like with Navi or Tattle, at least, it was a highlight, and then you press a button, it said, "This is the enemy, here's a short bio. I think this enemy is called this. Maybe you should consider something along these lines, vaguely. You have defeated X number of these enemies. Your battle performance is and it's just not very useful as a result. It's trying to be too helpful. Or the stuff where it's like, there is a 75% chance you need to go through this door behind me, and it's like, do I? That's where I was going anyway.
But thanks for that.
Thanks for that. It doesn't go, it's not for me.
Fair enough.
I think some of the stuff is far too obvious, some of the stuff is far too vague.
The game also now has an autosave feature. As a result, the option to save after completing a dungeon has been removed. When using the bird statue, it is possible to save to any of the free save files. Hero mode, once it's been unlocked, can now be saved into its own saved slot. The game also features an amiibo support. That would be a nice way of buy it on Nintendo channel or Nintendo Direct. We won't give you the amiibo, but we'll give you money off the amiibo, or it'll be cheaper to get the amiibo, or have it included in a very special edition That would be pretty cool. But by using the Zelda and Loftwing amiibo, Link can travel between save points in the sky and on the surface, which, from everyone I've heard who has one of those, is barely anything. But it's still a nice feature. And it uses amiibo things, but it's still not anything to write home about.
It's one of those features that should have been just in the game, though.
Yeah.
Because it is one of the big annoyances, like we were talking about with getting new shields and stuff, is the backtracking to Skyloft.
Yeah.
Because it's this whole big thing where you have to find a statue, go to the sky, it spits you out where you came down, you then have to fly, sometimes for a little distance, to get to Skyloft, drop down, go where you want to go to the market, go there. The only real saving grace is when you come back, you can drop to any statue. So you don't lose anything there. But it's not fast travel. It's just very, very slow travel. And it does feel like you're kind of going out of your way to try and go to the shops and come back.
There is also a little list I have here of the very, basic sort of changes that there are. Like the Sheikah Stones have been removed entirely. Various areas like the Thunder Herd and Tentacular Boss Arena have a rain effect attached to the camera. But some of it is literally just the way it looks. It's not worth really going into. But it's cool that they've made it more defined and they have made certain differences. As of December 2021, Skyward Sword HD for Nintendo Switch has sold 3.85 million copies worldwide, which is pretty cool.
That is good, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good amount in my book. So, what are your overall feelings of dear old Skyward Sword?
I think throughout the video you can probably glean what I'm going to say here. But I think it's a conceptually very strong game. And even in some points, I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like with the little beetle and stuff like that. There's stuff where I was like, oh yeah, I really like this. But the controls, the motion controls I couldn't get my head around them.
Yeah.
Like I say, I've only ever played the Switch one, but the Switch motion controls I just struggled with from the get-go. The button controls are better, but they're better from something I consider bad, so they're still not amazingly good. The big compromises on a lot of the controls in order to make the motion controls from the original version still work means that for stuff like for the free camera you have to hold down a button to move and then the right stick becomes a free camera. Fair enough. Stuff that is more annoying is stuff like having to throw a bomb, you have to tap the button, not hold it, tap it, as long as you don't need to change into that item. You then lift it up. Then you have to move the right stick forward or down if you want to throw it or roll it. And then you have to tap the button again to use it. If you do the side stick first, you do your sword. If you press the two buttons side by side, you'll pick up a bomb and put it at your own feet and it'll blow up in your face. It's just very precise. I got into it, but it's not intuitive.
Yeah.
Like, when I think of games that have truly intuitive control schemes, I think of the likes of the Mario series. Even, Breath of the Wild, I think, is more intuitive than this. And that game still can take you a little while to really get into.
So I'm on the same track as you. Some people might call me a bit of a Philistine, but my main problem with this game was not the way it looked. I really liked the way it looked. I really liked the storyline. I thought it was a different way of doing a traditional storyline. Some of the areas, as we mentioned earlier, did feel very compact and very limiting compared to older Zelda games. But I can see where they were trying to go developmentally. So looking into it a bit more, I can see where that inspiration came from. I did like how it had sections within sections, because I like that bit out of Twilight Princess. I like being able to go back. My main issue, and unfortunately it's quite a big issue because you can't play the game without it, is the motion control. As I said, I have the big nostalgia out of us two. I did have the game, but I wasn't able to get half as far as I needed to. I could have done a lot better if they'd just made the motion control, not even the motion plus, if they'd just made the motion control optional, which they have made in the Switch version, because you can play it handheld or you can play it off your TV. So if they'd just made it optional, which obviously they can do. It just would have given me a lot more bearing. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't have tried the motion control, but it means on certain levels, I can't tell you how long it took me to defeat, what's the main the white-haired bad guy called?
Girahim.
Girahim. How long it took me to defeat him in the first temple. It was stupidly long. It was really pathetically long. And that's the easiest boss. Imagine some of the other bosses. Definitely for you guys who played more. You can picture the other bosses that are coming up. It took me so long to defeat that one with motion control. Hey, it might have been a me issue. Please comment in the link below. But personally, I found it too frustrating to continue. And I've loved the fact that the HD version has come out. It's just that it will still not be one of my favourite Zelda games. Because even in a handheld mode, the way the sword goes, I really like it. It's really original, but it's not how I play Zelda. Even the Breath of the Wild, like, I know they've tried something new with the open world concept. I'm like, yeah, Zelda in an open world. But they still kind of kept the core mechanics of Zelda fighting and gameplay, which I've got to admit, I'm a bit of a stickler to. Like, all the Mario games, regardless what they've tried and regardless what they've tried differently, they still kind of kept the core mechanics. And I think certain core mechanics of games, it's nice to try and it's good. I do want to really promote trying something different. I don't want to be like, just follow the same old norm, because it's good to try stuff that's different, but I don't think either the technology wasn't strong enough, the game was the wrong one to try it with, or they shouldn't have committed to only Motion Plus.
Yeah.
Just on a personal note. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, please comment in the links below. I've been so happy that you have joined us today. You can follow us on our Twitter account at ABK Studios. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this YouTube page. We would be very much appreciated. Yeah, we always want to hear your opinions. And as I said earlier, Zelda is a very close to our hearts. So we could talk forever, and we have, about the Zelda franchise. We probably could talk for another several hours more, but not on Skyward Sword. And let's be honest, we diverted a lot through this one anyway, so we managed to stay on topic most of the time. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Next week, we're actually going to take, like I say, we're halfway through the season. Next week will be no new proper episode. It'll probably just be a mid-season update, as there's just a few bits of housekeeping and update on this and other projects I need to do. But then in 2 weeks, the big nostalgia number 29, the next episode of season 3, will be Mario Party 8. So I hope you'll join us for that one. It's another fun episode looking back at a game where, unlike this one, where because of the HD re-release, it's all quite fresh, this was one where it's going back to a game that maybe isn't so fresh, and it was fun to revisit it. But until then, I've been Phil.
And I've been Vicky. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.